Welcome to MRS Bulletin Society News. My name is Gopal Rao, and I'm the Chief Editor for Technical Content at the Materials Research Society and also editor of MRS Bulletin. So today I'm pleased to be talking with Dr. Carolyn Duran, who is the current president of the Materials Research Society, MRS. And I believe this is the third in a series of our video discussions with Carolyn. So Dr. Duran is Vice President and Engineering Manager of Process Engineering and External Partnerships in Components Research at Intel Corporation. She's also an adjunct professor of Material Science and Engineering at Northwestern University. So Carolyn, welcome and thank you for talking with me again today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
So MRS was officially established in 1973, actually at Penn State University, not far from where I sit in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So next year, 2023, will thus mark the 50th anniversary of the founding of MRS, which is the focus of our conversation today. So Carolyn, I just wanted to ask you, what is being planned for the 50th anniversary activities to mark this special year and occasion and to celebrate this important anniversary? And how has MRS leadership, such as you, how have you been involved in this overall planning?
Sure, it's my pleasure. I have to say, I think we're all pretty excited about this milestone. I didn't realize that the MRS is just a few years younger than I am, so it's pretty exciting that we've been, coming on 50 years going strong. I know for the 40th anniversary, we kind of took a look back in MRS history, and that was what we chose to celebrate at that time. For the 50th, we're going to look back, of course, and recognize it and experience and celebrate those wins, but also really to take this opportunity to look forward and see how we are going to be different as a society in the next 10 years from the 10 that have come behind us. And so we're looking at our strategic aspirations and our diversity, equity, and inclusion aspirations and trying to take this opportunity of celebrating our time together as a society for 50 years, but to make sure we're engaging our members and the community in what MRS is doing today to set us up for success over the next decade. Myself and the board, as well as along with headquarters and many volunteers, have been engaged in generative discussions where we toss around ideas to understand what makes sense for us. That started back in the 2021 fall meeting to get input, and then through 2022, we've been meeting with the operating committee chairs, the editors-in-chief, the 2023 meeting chairs who get to celebrate the 50th anniversary as part of their meeting, to gather these different ideas to help us celebrate those 50 years and move the society into the future.
Very good. A lot of activities are indeed being planned, and I'm looking forward to them. Now, I've been with MRS for 25 years, and my first meeting was actually 30 years ago as a graduate student. So as MRS celebrates 50 years, what has been your own involvement with MRS since your first introduction to the society?
Yeah. Well, just like you, Gopal, my very first MRS engagement was also as a graduate student when I was at Northwestern University, and I've tried to stay engaged with the MRS over that time. That was probably 28 or 29 years ago, so close to your experience level as well. By the nature of my work, having taken a position within industry, there are times where I haven't been able to publish scientific papers or not always been able to go to the meetings, but I've tried to find ways to stay engaged with the MRS through that time. In particular, I've always had a passion for STEM, and so I started to get engaged with the Government Affairs Committee, and as we'd go to the congressional visit days and speak with folks of the U.S. government and different House of Representatives and congressional staffs about the importance of federal funding for basic research, not only for what it brings to industries like my own and to academia, but for students so that they can go into graduate school, get funded through something like an NSF grant, and we can see a more diverse population education moving on to get graduate degrees in engineering and material science related fields, even if they don't have the socioeconomic means to do so naturally. So that's always been a passion for me. And then over time, I've also been engaged with a lot of critical minerals in the world, in part by my day job, but also through the MRS. And so being able to contribute through rare earth minerals and things like that, as well as the supply chain certainty and understanding how that works in the world is another place that I've really enjoyed being engaged. Now, in the last couple of years with the leadership position, I've certainly been diving in deep and I've enjoyed every minute of it.
Very good. Now, you had mentioned the different planning that's ongoing for the 50th anniversary celebrations. I was wondering if you could give our viewers a preview of some of the activities or events that are being planned for next year.
Sure, absolutely. And I think there's ways in which the viewers can also contribute as well. So a key aspect of the planning was to support our strategic aspiration. And we're going to celebrate diversity across generations. You'll see a lot of 50 themed activities. So social media, virtual offerings, and things like that. One of the ones I'm really excited about, though, is we're going to highlight 50 landmark papers from the MRS publications over time, promoting materials research and innovations, including interviews of authors and EIC commentaries on their continuing impact on materials research and researchers. So as we look back through time, all the innovations that have come through the MRS in terms of meetings and publications will be exciting to celebrate those. So as an audience, I really hope you'll follow us on the social media channels and MRS News so you can see these features and more as we enter into 2023.
Now, of course, diversity, exclusion, and inclusivity are very important. DEI is a very important aspect for MRS. How will the 50th anniversary and related activities, do you think, help move us towards our DEI aspiration?
Yeah, this is another area of focus for us. We've long been recognized as a grassroots organization. We help seed different ideas and help them come to fruition. And so with respect to DEI, one of our goals moving forward is to support member-driven efforts for the materials community. And one step in that direction we're taking is refocusing the MRS University chapter special project grants to focus on DEI efforts at the local level. And then we've launched a new diversifying materials special project funding program to support society level programs proposed by the different SIGs, the special interest groups that we rolled out last year. So any of you who are watching this, I encourage you to visit the DEI webpage for more information and also to learn how you can get engaged or perhaps even donate to the MRS Foundation, in particularly the Diversity and Inclusion Fund, to help get these things off the ground.
So let me wrap up by maybe getting your thoughts on what you think MRS will or should look like in the next 50 years as we look forward towards the future.
It's a hard thing to project 50 years out, as we don't know what inventions and innovations will come our way, but there's a couple of things that for sure I can emphasize. There are a lot of aspects of MRS that kept me as a member over the long term, kept many of us members as long terms. And so first and foremost, I want to make sure we don't lose that sense of community that we have, but we can build on that community. The world has changed in the past 3 years, as we all know, with COVID. And so our future will be different in the sense that we'll have our meetings and our means to gather together face to face and in person when that's possible, but really expanding on what we can do virtually to keep those connections through the year, not just at the 2 meetings, is one aspect of that I want to really make sure that we emphasize and continue to keep those positives. A second thing is I think that really as we get these special interest groups together and we look strategically moving forward, how do we make sure that that grassroots efforts that is MRS continues to prevail, and that we can be that forefront or be a body in which new ideas and new communities can come together that we don't even know what they are yet. And so can we be that space in which to grow that interdisciplinary materials research in areas that have yet been untapped? And then finally, I think, the change we've made over the last year to 18 months in terms of our publications and becoming that virtuous cycle as the preeminent place to submit and publish your research for materials is another factor that I'm excited to see as that improves and we continue to get that virtuous improvement moving forward.
Very well said indeed. So just to wrap up, I'd like to invite all of our viewers to join us in celebrating MRS's 50th anniversary in 2023. Please join us in San Francisco for the spring meeting and our usual fall meeting in Boston next year. And of course, also in the various virtual events that we're planning for next year. So it's always a pleasure talking with you, Carolyn. Thank you very much for joining us today.
It's my pleasure. I'm very happy to be here.
Again, my name is Gopal Rao from the Materials Research Society. For more news, please visit the MRS Bulletin website, mrsbulletin.org. You can also follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @MRS Bulletin. Thanks again to Dr. Duran, and thank you all for watching.